So this is Bob Ferguson, and it is my tremendous pleasure today to have with me Admiral Mike Franken. I've had quite a few illustrious folks on Life with Bob interviews, but I have to say this is so far, I think, the apex. So let me do a little introduction to Admiral Franken, and then we'll get rolling. So Admiral Mike Franken is running for the Democratic nomination to defeat Senator Chuck Grassley. Admiral Franken was born the youngest of 9 children and raised in rural Northwest Iowa. He spent his formative years in his dad's Lebanon farm shop as a welder and a lathe operator. He worked his way through college as a farmhand and by working for a slaughterhouse. He received the Navy scholarship while in college. Admiral Franken's career stretched across multiple continents and almost 40 years. He commanded the destroyer USS WINSTON S CHURCHILL, a squadron of ships, and an international task group at sea. He was the task force commander for the 4,000 U.S. personnel in East Africa and the first director of the POW MIA Defense Agency. He went on to serve in various policymaking, strategy, and planning roles, to include Chief of Legislative Affairs for the Department of Navy. He retired from military service as a 3-star admiral in 2017. Mike and his wife, Jordan, have 2 adult children. So Admiral Franken, thank you very much for being with me.
Pleased to be here, Bob. Thank you, sir.
So all of us fully expect that you will be elected to the Senate. And so my first question is, once you're elected, you arrive in Washington, what is your first priority? And what do you feel can be achieved in this divided body politic time that we have going for us?
I believe I represent a slightly different candidate than what many of my constituents have voted for in the past, and also what the other side of the aisle has faced. And I hope to be somewhat of a congealing force. I've worked for every president since Jimmy Carter, and I specifically didn't choose to vote for Donald Trump. I submitted my request to resign after his election. I'm a rather pragmatic, and I've worked for the Bush administration and Obama and the Clinton White House, and I believe I can work across the aisle. I certainly did that when I started a defense agency. But there are issues that I think Iowa needs first and foremost, and that is a rejuvenation of our progressivism on the deck plates. But I would work very hard from the county supervisor and the school board up to elected members of the State House to grow a new crop of progressive individuals, altruistic, like-minded, broad-minded, running for the betterment of humankind versus strumming some cultural string that really adds to the dysfunction and the divisiveness in society. Really work hard on ensuring that Iowa has that type of future where young people growing up, coming out of our high schools, are ranked number 1 in the nation with public education, clean air, clean water, that platform of life that's available where they can get spring-loaded and do great things in life, and where hope is a factor that's built into how they were raised. And so I want to build that back in the state of Iowa, where the high school graduation and trade school and apprentice programs are such that the sky's the limit. And it starts with farming those individuals who believe the basic truism of democracy, that you believe and you want the best for those you've never met, just as you do the people you know. And that's a truism that I like to live by.
Really a marvelous vision. I think many people, when they hear the word progressive, different things fire off in their brain. And I'm really glad you spent some time defining that. And I might even ask you to reiterate, what, in your opinion, does it mean to be a progressive or to be progressive?
I look at progressivism as a human trait that always wants to do better for the succeeding generation, not live in the past. This isn't the 1952. This isn't voter restriction issues. This isn't pollute the stream for the benefit of corporate profit. This is not cut public education because, like my wife and I, we have a special needs daughter because, we don't need to spend that much on those special needs children. It's that sense where we all are in this together, and whatever we do at this platform of life benefits the next generation. When I was the senior DoD person on the continent of Africa, I was asked soon after I took command of a large contingent of ground forces at the time, State Department, humanitarian people, etc. Hey, Franken, before we write your strategy so that we can step off on this, what are your basic belief systems? And I said, my belief systems are very simple in the continent of Africa. Do what's best for the women and what's best for the children. All else will follow. And I'll write you a strategy shortly thereafter. But if those two dictums are followed, we'll be on the right path. And I think that's true for much of Iowa as well. I'm a very pro-business individual, but I think it has to be under a fair tax code and with the constraints that the worker really matters.
Oh, well, certainly warming the cockles of my heart. So let's go from that to current events that are occupying people's mind, chief among them, the tragedy unfolding in Ukraine. And might want to just get your thoughts on that and how we can most constructively engage ourselves in that in a way that will create the best results, again, for everyone. And then look broadly at your vision for the United States' strategic position in the world. What is our particular responsibility? Being who we are, what is our responsibility in the world? So maybe start with Ukraine and then go to an even bigger picture.
It's followed closely with fixing world hunger.
Yes, well, we'll handle that in a few minutes.
Sure. No, so Ukraine, I have background, certainly after jousting with the Russians, Soviets at the time for 12 years. And then ultimately, I was put in a very interesting spot as a farm kid from Iowa. I was an engineer and a physics person through my scholastic achievements in grad school and the like. And then ultimately, I applied for a federal executive fellowship, and I ended up at the Brookings Institute, downtown Washington, for a PhD program that I was pulled out of that and thrown into a federal executive fellowship in Ted Kennedy's office. So I was this farm kid in King Arthur's Court surrounded by Harvard law grads. And in that capacity, we were working loose nukes, fissile material, cooperative threat reduction, conventional weapons disarmament issues east of the Urals. So a lot of time in the stands, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, etc. Ultimately down in Pakistan as well. So I have a long-standing interest in the area for reasons that ultimately the Ukrainians gave up their nuclear weapons, as we know. That was one of the conditions. And also the fact that Ukraine, the first country that recognized the existence of Ukraine was Russia, which is often lost in this discussion. So to see what's happening today, first in the Donbass area and then ultimately along the periphery of Ukraine is crushing to me. I did not think that Vladimir Putin was going to do this. And I say specifically him because this isn't the Russian people. This isn't the Kremlin writ large. This is, I think, the autocratic movements of a autocratic leader, a totalitarian. And I'm surprised that he did this because there are no cultural, historical rationales for doing this. This is Russia, last gasp, last attempt to try and regain something they had long since walked away from. Things in Russia, as you know, from dental appointments to high school graduations to life expectancy to environmental degradation to resource exploitation are all trending poorly. And Ukraine, on the other hand, are all trending positive. So this is a last gasp effort for Vladimir Putin to try and grab some of this old white Russia And he's not finished with just Ukraine. He would like to continue going westward. So that's the baseline. I believe our president is doing this reasonably well. There are additional capabilities. Had we known this was going to happen, we could have outfitted the Ukrainians with better merchandise to fend off the terrible wreckage that the Russians are spewing upon their cities. But where we are, I think ultimately Putin has already lost this conflict. He just doesn't know it. And what he's trying to do now is hold his perimeters and create this fuzzy DMZ, this demilitarized zone, so that he's encroached upon thousands and thousands of square miles of this rich, fertile country, which he'll call his. And it's a typical, pardon the gross categorization, typical Russian maneuver to say something which is untruthful, to garner something that you would not normally have, and then call it even. And that's exactly what he's doing in Ukraine. He has no right to it, but he's gathered this together. So this now becomes the new baseline of what is his. And any kind of retreat from this will come at a cost for other measures. Where's America's role in this? Fortunately, we have this administration, and this administration will, I think, go forward with a better sense of leadership worldwide. And one of the best things we did under Biden was created this international leadership and like-minded nations constituency, which is pushing back on the Russians. And there's some outliers out there. China could be more, India could be more, South Africa, et cetera. But they're outliers. And ultimately, we could put the screws to them in other measures to get them to fall in. We hold the cue ball, and it is economic power. So countries such as China should take heed. Strategically for the United States, I don't believe that we want to get involved in needless conflict. And as the elected leader in the state of Iowa, who spent a lot of years of his life in conflict and seen what happens in places like Ukraine, where for every month in conflict, a year's worth of infrastructure is destroyed. And for every soldier killed, oftentimes 4 to 6 civilians ultimately die in the out years. This is a travesty. This is a dreadful situation of untold proportions. Let's keep in mind that nuclear weapons are never very far from the discussion, and the Russians view the use of nuclear weapons to be much more part of their kit in a tactical sense than any other country on the face of the globe would. And once they shoot a nuclear weapon, I'm afraid that humanity may very well take a turn that it has thus far kept from realizing in 80 years, and this will not go well for us. So that's my long-winded answer to that, but there's more. I'm an internationalist. I've lived on 4 continents, not 1, but 2 Muslim countries in my life. And I have a deep abiding interest that Iowans here, their well-being, their quality of life is dictated somewhat, and in some cases to a high degree, on how well the United States and how the international order writ large is maintained.
So thinking about Main Street versus Wall Street, what would be your prescription for creating a more vibrant economy, more vibrant, perhaps more varied economy in Iowa? Policy prescriptions, both on the national level and what you would recommend that we do within the state.
So I come from a town that was about 50 people, and I'm probably cheating on that number. There's probably a few less. 11 of them, not 10 of them or so were in my family, and 9 of them were next door. So only about 6 homes. And initially it was on a gravel road, and then they paved the road. That was pretty phenomenal progress. But then the one pump gas station went out of business, so that was too bad. But that's my production, and that was my center of the universe growing up. The creek down the street which is, not down the street, across the field, was full of tadpoles, muskrat, turtle, snakes, crappie, bullheads, etc. And it was a veritable zoo of animals. Today, there's nothing alive in that creek at all. Water's in it, but that's about it. That's indicative of much of rural Iowa. And so you need to look at the quality of life. What brings people back? You can't very well in an aged population. And oftentimes if you make your living, et cetera, and you would like a different lifestyle, you're drawn to your roots. And I'm certainly that way. But you can't move to small town Iowa if you don't have a medical clinic. And why don't you have a medical clinic? Because it's not financially affordable to do so. You can't make a living. So, in a more grand way, as we walk way back, we need a healthcare system that is marketable, and you can open a clinic with a PA and a nursing assistant and small office help that's viable in a community of 2,000 people, and where you have a visiting specialist come by a couple times a week. And telemedicine is very much part of your repertoire. That combined with, you've got to be able to have some kind of food other than a Dollar General store. And the schools have to be top notch. You can't be concerned about your kids being decremented because they're in a rural school. And it wasn't that way when I was growing up. In Sioux Center, Iowa, it was in the 99th percentile for Iowa tests of basic skills. And I'm just a farm kid, and I didn't know I was getting such a good education until I went to college, until I went in my professional life and realized that I was well prepared. All of these attributes are part of this cottage of creating a community that has those basic pillars of quality of life that are firm, and also the sense of community, because of the manner in which we don't do the social interactions like we used to. The community center needs to be robust. The library needs to be active. The Chamber of Commerce needs to be part of the community, not this distant entity that works just enough to get by for the next legislative cycle. We need help from the State House so that when our kids go to college or go to trade school, they can afford to stay, and they don't have to go to a big city for higher wages to pay back. And the quality of life is such that they may not come back to Primgar, but by George, they may come back to George, and where that option exists. So my view is a renaissance for rural Iowa. Broadband issues, 5G issues, quality of life, good roads, good communication paths, emergency services. And the biggest issue is those medical clinics. You've got to have the type of medical care that I had in almost 40 years in the military in my family, where price is not the option, is not the issue. Location, who does what, it's all part of the package. And price is not an issue that's discussed at all. We need to do that in America, first and foremost.
Well, certainly won't get any pushback from me on that. So thinking about the issue of climate change, I know that I had conversations with Admiral Len Herring, who was a fabled Navy base commander. I suspect, and I believe, that the Navy was the service branch that really recognized the threat of climate change, because of course their assets are on the coast and subject to inundation. How would you, as a U.S. Senator, help tackle the whole issue of climate change, our response to it, both mitigating and at the same time creating systems that perhaps recarbonize soils, that kind of thing? As a senator, how would you, practically speaking, want to deal with the existential threat of climate change?
So this has been near and dear to my heart for some time. I grew up in a situation where my mother was very much the naturalist. When the garden was finished for the season, that's where the neighbors' horses would go, and they would eat the residual, and we'd throw apples and cherries, all the rotten stuff in there, and they would eat them, and that was a way to greatly fertilize the soil for the next year in that garden of ours without ever using any kind of chemicals on it whatsoever. And obviously that's a micro economic model, but it's not used in a broad sense, nor practical. But those are my underpinnings. And when I was a captain of a ship, there's many thousands of commands in Department of Defense. We won the Battle Efficiency Award, where the environmental award on how to be the best environmental stewards. It's just the way we think. And I think that's very key. And it's not a Democrat issue. It's not a Republican issue. It's a humanity issue. I would, it's so multifaceted. Ultimately, high-speed trains ought to be a thing in the United States. You know, the nation of Japan just went past their 10 billionth mile, I believe, of passenger service on high-speed train with nary a casualty. It is our automobile companies and our asphalt companies shouldn't be scared of this. They should welcome it as a different employment line. And ultimately, I can imagine a high-speed levitated train zorching across Interstate 80, the length of 80 and length of 35, providing that spinal backbone for an expanded EV technology in the state of Iowa. And then tentacles running from Highway 29 to 141, et cetera, et cetera. We can do this as a country. The Navy was the first service that ran a day on biofuels, and you look at who's the largest user or discharger of carbon in the United States, it's the U.S. government. The largest entity in the U.S. government is the Department of Defense, and the Air Force, I believe, is the biggest purveyor of carbon because of the aircraft. But I would be a big fan, like on a micro scale, that we start looking at the systems we buy to ensure that they minimize the carbon footprint. And the way we have big, heavy fighters with high performance engines, and we bring fuel to them on operations, is really not a very good plan. For instance, the heavy equipment we use, there's opportunities where we can do better. Where, I spent a lot of time in Afghanistan. Some of that fuel that we use in those distant areas cost an enormous amount of money, not because the fuel was expensive, but getting it there was so expensive. We just got to think differently. And for every branch of government, we ought to have an environmental compliance officer and make that person have veto authority to ensure that we're being good stewards. And we should grade industry on this. This should be part of why we drink this beverage or why we drive that car. What kind of environmental stewards is that company? Some of the stocks and the index funds that have to do with that are doing extremely well. There's a whole covey of individuals that see that this is existential to us, and we better concentrate and put our money where our mouth is.
Admiral Franken, we could go on and on. Nothing would please me more than just to keep on rolling. But I think that we have covered a lot of issues, and maybe we will do Life with Bob interview number 2 at some point. But why don't we wrap up with a summary of the actions that you'll take, because this is really for my friends and colleagues and neighbors in Iowa. If you're elected, and I firmly believe you will be, what are your key priorities and how will you pursue them in general? What will be your philosophy of governance?
Bob, first and foremost, I'm pro-democracy. And I think January 6th, we witnessed this swirling darkness that is a part of the American id that we need to address and ultimately expunge. So I am pro-democracy, which ensures that people can vote and vote to their conscience and ensure that we've got clarity in the issues. I am pro-human rights and pro-civil rights. First and foremost, you need to be treated as a person, altruistically. And the basic premise of being a Democrat shouldn't be just for Democrats. It should be for all elected leaders, that you care as much for the person you've never met as those you know. And we seem to have fallen away from that. We became tribal in our designs and our desires. We've also become trite. Little issues, little social, cultural issues have become the dominant discussions, when in fact, it's minuscule to the larger scheme of things that must get done. I would be pro-democracy, pro-human rights, pro-business, but with a fair tax code, and with controls placed on business that they become the stewards of a higher quality of life and a better future for the next generation. I believe that ultimately everybody in the United States ought to have my type of healthcare. I find it absolutely astonishing that we've got the best medical providers, bar none. We've got the best facilities and the best equipment, and we've got the least efficient system I've ever seen in all my travels to 150 some different countries, many of them dozens of times. I've had medical procedures done in numerous countries, and I must say that our system is the least efficient of all. And the people who will agree with me the most, I think, are the medical providers. They just want to be medical providers, medical professionals, and our system is broken. I believe that from an environmental perspective, we need to help developing countries achieve the standard of living that they deserve and they would like to assume in a more artful manner, so that they don't take this path of heavy carbon discharge like we did. We rectify that and help them achieve that. And we can do it in a multitude of ways. This is our job as this nation of 325 million people, to help the continent of Africa of 1.5 billion, or South Asia, 1.2 billion people, how they can achieve a higher level of living and not have to burn charcoal and open gas flames and the like. In short, I want to ensure that the next generation lives better than we did. And that we, my generation, us, have Social Security that is here for the next generation as well. I think many people say, well, Social Security, of course, is here forever. I wouldn't take that bet. I believe there's corners of America that would like to get rid of Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and the Affordable Care Act, and let the free market reign. That, to me, is an atrocious perspective and has not proven true in any country in the world today. And that's just rampant profit making and the like. My job is to not support any segment of society. It's to support society writ large. And this is an opportunity for serious candidates to run. Americans want serious action done. And we don't want cutesy, nonsensical House members that act goofy, or senators that like to stand in the limelight. We want people to hammer out ideas that have long-term consequences that span generations.
Well, Admiral Franken, on that inspiring note, we are going to close up for today, but I certainly hope this isn't the last time we have an opportunity to converse. So thank you very much. Thank you for your service in the past, and thank you for being willing to really go to bat for all of us, both in the state of Iowa and the country.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you so very much, Bob.